Welcome to Flourishment, the podcast on living life as you are meant to, so you can flourish. Welcome, everyone. I have with me today Grace Fox. She's a career missionary, a popular Bible teacher, and the author of 10 books, including her latest release, Finding Hope in Crisis, Devotions for Calm in Chaos. Welcome, Grace. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you, Tina. I'm excited to be here too.
And I have to tell you that Grace has just shown me grace because I was running a little late and had lost track of time. And she is a very gracious woman of God. So I am anxious to hear what she has to say about finding hope in crisis, because I feel like people are really in crisis during these times more than ever. And this is such a timely message. Grace, thank you for coming on Flourishment today. And thank you for being who you are to everyone that you meet.
Well, thank you for your encouraging words. It's a privilege. It's just really a privilege to be able to be involved in building God's kingdom.
What in your background made you feel compelled to write about finding hope in crisis?
I have experienced a few crises in my lifetime, and I know how they can change your life, right? If we view them as God encourages us to view them as opportunities for joy, but they can also break us if we allow them to make us bitter or angry. But I just remember thinking a couple of years ago how I remember some experiences that I've gone through, and it was hard to remember what day of the week it was, let alone get into the Word and read a long passage and concentrate and then remember it at the end. I couldn't do that. My head was in a space where I was on overload, and I desperately needed the encouragement from God's Word, but I just couldn't focus on anything long. And so that's where this concept of this little book of nuggets, I guess I would call them doable nuggets for people whose minds are on overload. That's where that concept was born.
Well, thank you for writing this book. And I just want to hear you speak to the listeners right now, those people that are in crisis at this moment in their lives. Is there one thing that you want to begin with when you talk to them about how to find hope? Where do they start?
There are a couple of definitions of hope. One is a more basic dictionary definition, and it's like having wishful thinking for something good to happen, or having a gut feeling that something good that you want is going to happen. And the other one is more of a biblical definition, that it's expectant anticipation of a good outcome because it's all in God's control. And that is where I want my mind to stay, and where I would hope other people's hearts and minds would be able to stay, that on that definition of hope, that it's in God's control. And when we talk about a favorable outcome, it doesn't mean the outcome that we wish for. It doesn't mean that it's not going to be an outcome that doesn't hurt, but it means that God is in control, and we can expect it to have a good outcome for eventually our good and his glory, whatever that looks like, because he's the one who's in control of every detail of our lives.
Can you talk to the listeners about your own experience with crisis and how you were able to develop that expectant hope that was based on knowing God had control?
Sure. I've had several experiences in the past few years, but the one that came earlier on well, I was in my mid 20s when this happened, and it changed my life. I truly believe that this is where that bottom line message of directing people into the Word and the heart of God to find hope. I truly believe that this is where it was born. My husband and I were missionaries in Nepal at the time, back in the 80s. My husband was actually working with a nonprofit that was doing a hydroelectric power project. And that's really how we were in the country with a visa like that. So we were stationed in a little tiny village, about 12 hours drive out of Kathmandu. And we were there for our first 2 years. as newlyweds, our first child was born in a mission hospital a couple hours drive away from that village, and we took him back there. Then I became pregnant a second time. And when I was 6 months pregnant, our mission organization transferred us to that hospital project and changed my husband's work orders, basically. So now he had a different job to do there, and we had to be at that hospital site for him to do that job. And in retrospect, we saw that as the hand of God moving us to that hospital project, because our second child was born 3 months later with a medical condition called hydrocephalus, which is too much water on the brain. And so our little girl, Stephanie, was barely 5 pounds at birth, but this large head, the size of a large melon, just filled with excess fluid. And doctors told us then that you're done here. You need to go back to North America because she needs life-saving surgery. We believe there are other things going on in her body too, but we don't have the equipment here to check anything. And so you need to get on the first available flight back to North America. And when we tried to get airline tickets, I was refused by the airlines because I had to have a C-section to deliver her. And they said, you're a medical high risk, so you're not going anywhere. And we don't want a baby under 2 weeks of age on a plane either. But we knew that if we waited that long, she would probably die. So my husband ended up getting a ticket for himself, and he just said, I'm taking her home, and wrapped her in a blanket. We gave him a diaper bag filled with a few supplies and a bottle of express breast milk. And he took her home when she was 3 days old. But I remember laying on the bed, because we had to have this long drive to Kathmandu to get to the airport. So she was 2 days old when we took that long drive. And he left with her on the morning of her third day. So I remember laying there on the bed and just crying and saying, wow, God, 2 years of culture shock I worked through. And it was hard. It was really hard there for me. And I had worked through that place of wanting to stay. And we had already just committed the rest of our lives to missions there. And then this. And I was saying, Lord, I don't get what's happening here. And I really don't appreciate what's happening here. I just don't understand. So what is it you have for me to learn in this? And I don't even know if I'm going to see my daughter alive again or not. So what is going on? And what is it you want me to learn through this? So just laying there, crying out to God with tears streaming down my face. And in the midst of that very dark moment, him putting the words of great is thy faithfulness into my mind. So he didn't promise me that my daughter was going to live, and if she did, she'd have a great quality of life. He didn't promise me that everything was going to turn out this outcome that I wished it would turn out as, but he promised me that he would be faithful no matter what. And I learned from that experience that what we believe to be true about the character of God makes all the difference in the world. When we get into those hard places and where hope fades, we have to hang on to the truth of who he is. And that truth of who he is revealed in the word. So we have to know the word and be in the word on an ongoing basis for when that crisis strikes, because it'll strike with no warning. Often we don't have any forewarning. And so we need to be ready for that. And that comes from being in the word. And I am so grateful for that experience, even though it was so hard. My daughter did live. She's 35 now, and she's doing quite well. But it was 2 years of ongoing surgeries for her, and meningitis when she was 11 months old, and ongoing crisis. But I learned to trust and I learned to hope, not because I had any guarantee that any of those experiences were going to turn out well, but because I knew that God would be faithful. And we have to cling to that when crisis strikes. God is faithful. He always has been and he always will be. And he will carry us through.
I wonder if that's why so many people become disillusioned with God, because they are expecting results. Their hope is in the outcome, not in God himself being with us no matter what the outcome is.
Tina, I think that's a really good way to put it, and that we put our hope in the outcome. And we look down the road and we think we know what we want that outcome to be. And when it doesn't turn out, then we lose hope. And I think just based on what you said, I love how you put that. We lose hope because the circumstances haven't turned out the way we wish they would. But God hasn't changed. His character hasn't changed, and his reliability hasn't changed. So it's where we put our vision, it's where we put our focus, and that's what we need to hang on to is who is God and what has he promised? He's promised to be faithful, and he's promised that even if our hard place is really hard and doesn't turn out the way we wish, still he's able to turn it out for something good and something of beauty, because he never calls us to that place of suffering without using it in some way to work deeply in our lives. And I think one of those ways of working deeply is to give us that experience of getting to know him in a much more intimate way than we would otherwise, and in making us more like Jesus.
In the midst of a time of terrific suffering and crisis, it's easy to get tempted moment by moment to lose hope, to despair. I think it is a battle of moment by moment. What are some things that people can cling to give them those finger holds and toe holds on the side of that cliff of despair in time of crisis, to keep having hold of hope in God, not just our circumstances? How do we do that? Are there some things that we can hold on to during those times?
There's one biblical truth we need to cling to, I believe, and it's found in Psalm 139, verses 16 and 17. And it says that all of our days were ordained for us before written in God's book. Even before any of them came to be, he knew what our days would hold. And so remembering that what's happened to us is no surprise to God. He didn't wake up that morning and say, "Oh my goodness, I dropped the ball. Look at what's happened to my child." He knew that this was going to happen, and it didn't take him by surprise. And I find great hope in knowing that God isn't caught off guard. He is not up there in the heavenlies wringing his hands and saying, "I don't know what to do now." He's got it, and we can trust him. A passage that I often go back to cling to as well, that has some really practical steps we can take, is Philippians 4, 6, and 7. And that I would just call that God's solution to worry when we get into those hard places. And it says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God." And then there's the promise. "And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." And so when I get into that hard place, I remember these scriptures, but then I take them apart little by little. And I say, what am I supposed to do here? What am I supposed to do? And it says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but pray and give thanks." And so I always think it's like a mathematical equation. If I remember it like a math equation, there are three things on the left side of the equation. And it's like, refuse to be anxious, refuse to entertain those thoughts that are so fearful and the what ifs. Just say, stop. I'm not going there. I'm not going to let it wreak havoc in my mind. So I say, stop. And that's one. So refuse to be anxious, plus pray about those things that are making me anxious, plus give thanks. And I have found in the past that whenever I just pray and pray and pray and pray about those things that are causing me to be anxious, I get more anxious, because that's where the focus of my brain is. And it's like whatever I focus on the most gets bigger in my head. It almost takes up real estate space in my brain. So that's where the thanksgiving comes in as a must. It has to be on that left side of the equation along with prayer. So giving thanks not for what's happened, but giving thanks in what's happened, that God is with me and his promises to carry me through and be my strength and be my refuge and hear my cries for help. All of those things are things that I can give thanks for in the midst of that hard place. But it's a necessary part of that equation. So it's refuse to be anxious, plus pray, plus give thanks, and then it equals peace. If I miss any one of those three things on the left side of that equal sign, I'm not going to end up with peace on the right side of that equation.
Those are really good tips for people who are in a place of tremendous worry and fear and anxiety. What about those people who have experienced some of their worst fears realized, and that is their crisis? Maybe they've had a horrific, tragic loss, and a lot of people have right now experienced loss, or they've lost not just a loved one, but they also have lost a job, or they are experiencing a disability or a health crisis of some kind. Something that they have always feared has actually happened. How do they reconcile continuing to trust when these terrible things seem to be a place of no hope?
Mhm. My heart aches for anybody who's in that place. And that's because I lost my mom during the COVID time. And I so feel the pain that others are going through. But something that carried me through in that crisis of losing my mom was 2 Corinthians 4:17. And it starts out by saying, our present trials are small and won't last forever. And part of me wants to say, you've got to be kidding me, right? Because at the moment, when you're in the midst of this, it doesn't feel very small. And it doesn't feel like it's not going to last forever. It feels very big and it feels like there's no end in sight because I don't see the light at the end of this tunnel right now. That's what we feel. And that's truly what our emotions might be saying. But the other part of that verse says, our present trials are producing something of glory that will vastly outweigh them all and that will last forever. And I think where our emotions want to say, there's no light, there's no way I'm going to get through this thing because it hurts so bad right now. We have to, it's almost like pulling up our bootstraps at some point and say, I'm not going to just dwell on that because I know my emotions are telling me that this is not working for me right now. But to say, the truth says that something is happening beyond what I can see right now. There's something invisible that's taking place in the heavenlies. And what I'm going through right now is producing something of glory that's going to be so much bigger than the pain I feel today. It's going to vastly outweigh the pain I'm feeling right now, and it's going to last forever. And I don't know what that looks like, but I'm going to cling to this. We have to speak these things out loud because there's power in hearing words spoken. But to just take the word, write it out on a recipe card, and turn it into a prayer when we have to, when we feel like all is lost, and say, God, you said that my present trial is small and won't last forever. I don't understand what that means, but I'm going to walk by faith, believing that this thing that's happening in my life right now that hurts so bad is producing something of glory that's going to far outweigh the pain I'm feeling right now. And it's going to last forever. I don't know what that's going to look like, Lord, but I stand on that right now. I walk in that truth right now. Yeah. Just take and walk it out. Even when your heart isn't feeling it, do it by faith.
I am so sorry for your tragic loss, Grace, and I really, really appreciate you opening your heart to the audience so they can see exactly by you sharing your fullness of your heart in the midst of your own grief, how to handle their grief, how to handle suffering in a real, true way, not just a textbook way. This comes from your soul. And I know that everyone listening can hear how genuine and authentic your words are. So I just want to extend my appreciation for you loving those who are listening in the way that you are right now.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you. And I think when the concept for this little book was born, like I say, I just felt like something needed to be provided for people, I guess I would say, whose mind is on overload. It's just on overload, and you can only take in so much because when you're in a crisis, sometimes you have a list of things that have to be taken care of, practical things that must be done. And you're just moving almost like a robot in going through those actions of doing what has to be done. But sometimes you may be sitting there in shock. You can't even wrap your head around what's happening. Sometimes you're just sitting maybe beside a loved one who's just gone through a horrible loss and you don't even know what to say. You're trying to capture it all too and figure out what to do here. But when I went through that experience with my mom, it was like I became my own audience because I couldn't get into the word as much as I knew I wanted to, and as much as in my head I'm hearing this voice say, Grace, you really need to be having your quiet time. And you're falling by the way here because you're not reading your Bible and doing your daily quiet time. And I'm thinking, I can't. I know that I need the word, and I'm hanging on promises that are in my mind right now and that are hidden in my heart. Those are the things that I was clinging to, but I became my own audience for this little book where all I can take in is one little nugget, something that I can cling to get me through the day, get me through. Sometimes it's not even the day, right? Sometimes it's like, get me through the hour, get me through the minute, just get me through this minute so I can get through the next hour, so I can get through the day. Yeah, we need to just have something, and we need to be clinging to the truth, not to what our emotions are telling us, but to the truth.
Those little anchors to get us through one moment at a time are so vital in surviving a crisis or a loss. And so many people really need that right now. Are there any other specific things that you would like to say to those in the audience that are suffering a crisis right now and how to get through that?
Sometimes it's just a matter of taking a deep breath. When those thoughts come in of, I can't do this, or I'll never get through this, or what if? We just need to take a deep breath. And I talked to a counselor the other day about some stuff, and she was just saying, take the deep breath, and she had me practice. And so, it's a matter of a deep inhale and count to 4, just count to 4, and then holding it there to the count of 4, and then releasing that deep breath through your mouth to the count of 4, and then resting to the count of 4 before doing it again. And sometimes just that little practical step, it helps our brain get oxygen when we need that. And then learning to listen to what our mind is telling us. And when our thoughts are maybe saying, well, what if, our brains can take us from point A to point B in a nanosecond. And that journey that it takes us on might be taking us to all the wrong places. And fear will absolutely grip us when we let that happen. But maybe it's good sometimes to write down the what if fears on a piece of paper. Look at them in black and white. What is that we're afraid of? What is the what if? And then on the opposite side of that paper, so fold the paper in half, right? So you get the what ifs on the left side, and then write the corresponding truth on the right side. And I would say begin that corresponding truth with even if. So what if would be the worst possible thing. And even if that worst possible thing happens, what happens? Well, even if my worst imaginable fear comes to pass, God still holds me in his hand. Even if that thing happens, God has promised to be my shepherd, and he will lead me down that path. He will lead me along that journey. He will lead me beside those quiet waters, and he will refresh my soul. He will be there for me. That is a really practical action that we can take to just identify those worst fears and identify what the truth is in correspondence to those worst fears. But there's the what if and the even if, to hang on to those.
That is such strengthening, wise insight there and such a great practice. I actually would recommend that to clients myself to say, what if, and then even if, then God kind of statements on the other side of that. Even if this happens, then what will God do on the other side of that? What will God do if the worst thing happens? So that is really, really great clinical insight and advice that you're offering there for people. And the breathing can come with scripture too, but you have to have it written out ahead of time because you won't be able to think of it necessarily in that moment of crisis. So if you're breathing and you have it already written out, that's really helpful in that moment of struggle and of fear and of being on the edge of despair. Such great wisdom. Thank you so much, Grace, for providing that for us today.
My privilege to be here with you, Tina. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to share this message with your listeners.
How can listeners get your resources and stay connected with you, Grace, because you have such wonderful things to offer from the soul and from the heart to those who need it most?
Well, my website is easy to remember. It's gracefox.com. I write a weekly devotional blog, and they can subscribe to that by going to the website to gracefox.com/blog. And there'll be a place on the left-hand side of the page where they can subscribe. And I also have a monthly newsletter with book giveaways. I feature other authors' books as well for giveaways, and an inspirational article there and other helpful links. They can subscribe to that for free on the same page right there, gracefox.com/blog. And they can learn about my other resources, my other devotional books there on my website as well, gracefox.com/books. The tabs are on the top of the page so they can see the blog and the books tab if they can't remember those. My books are available on Amazon, on christianbooks.com. This little one we've been talking about today, the Finding Hope in Crisis, Devotions for Calm in Chaos. That is available on christianbooks.com and wherever Christian books are sold.
Thank you, Grace. And I hope that all of you listening will get in touch with Grace Fox at her website and make sure that you get your hands on Finding Hope in Crisis, Devotions for Calm in Chaos, whether it's for yourself so that you can be healed or for you to have on hand to share with those who need it, because it is undoubtedly going to be the case that either you or someone you know will need a resource like this to be able to know how to get through that day-by-day struggle in the midst of crisis. I also hope that you will come back for the next episode of Flourishment.